In a previous video, I showed that the Democratic Party has a lot of Islamist supporters, and they actually guide their policy in the Middle East, the policy towards Israel in particular. But there are also supporters of the Iranian regime, two people specifically at the center of a big scandal right now. And this might solve one of the great mysteries of the past decade. And what I'm talking about is the Iran nuclear deal. It's called by the acronym JCPOA. So what do we know? Well, this is Robert Malley, and this is Iranian Tabatabai. Robert Malley was the lead negotiator on the Iran nuclear deal, which was strongly opposed by leaders in the Middle East. The Saudis, the Israelis, they thought the US was insane. They said it made no sense. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS, he called it dangerously lenient. Netanyahu said this deal does not block Iran's path to a nuclear bomb. It paves Iran's path to a nuclear bomb. It severely limited inspections, and it involves sanctions relief to the tune of about $150 billion. So Iran could now pay for its military and its terrorist proxies. Netanyahu was so concerned that he flew to Washington to speak to Congress without an invitation from Obama. An unheard of breach of protocol. And Obama was deeply insulted. He refused to attend the speech, so did Vice President Joe Biden. Then Trump later pulled out of that deal, and Robert Malley condemned him for it. When Trump assassinated the head of the IRGC, Qasem Soleimani, Malley condemned that too. But Biden restarted the nuclear deal. He just picked it up from where Obama had left off. So it's been quite a mystery. Why would the US do something that other Middle East powers said was so incredibly dangerous and so advantageous to Iran? Well, now we might just have the answer. In June last year, Robert Malley's security clearance was revoked, and he's now under FBI investigation. The State Department claimed that he'd, quote-unquote, mishandled classified information, and they believe he'd shared it with Tehran. But even though he had been suspended, certain officials in the State Department, they continue to allow him to access classified information. That is how compromised the Biden-Harris government is. Now, Malley has been placed on indefinite leave at the moment, and the word is that he was full-on working for the Iranians. The other person of concern is Iranian Tabatabai. She was hired by Robert Malley, and she's a very influential position. She was the Chief of Staff to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations, and she was recently promoted. Very influential position. So here's what we know. In 2023, there was a discovery involving thousands of emails between members of the Biden administration, including Iranian Tabatabai, and Iranian diplomats, including the advisor to the Iranian Foreign Minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif. You may remember him. He often referred to Iran's quote-unquote axis of resistance, that is their terrorist proxies, like Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthi rebels, and he justified their actions. Now, the emails included a ton of highly inappropriate material, copies of passports, invitations to conferences, airplane tickets, visa applications, payment receipts, and extensive correspondence with foreign ministry officials and university staff and students as well. And Iranian Tabatabai had contacted Tehran for advice on things like visiting Israel or going to conferences. Malley, Tabatabai, and a few others were part of a group called the Iran Experts Initiative. Their objective was to influence U.S. institutions and government in a way that was favorable to the regime. One of its founding members is Mostafa Zahrani. He's a member of the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps. Now, the Iran Experts Initiative has groups in both the U.S. and Europe, so Europe is not immune from this. In 2006, the group held a two-day conference in Tehran called Review of the Holocaust. The speakers included, as you could imagine, a bunch of Holocaust deniers from around the world. Now, the incriminating emails against Iranian Tabatabai and others in the group went back as far as 2003. It had been going on for about 20 years. Remember when just recently Israel's plan to attack Iran was leaked to the Iranian regime? Well, Iranian Tabatabai was one of the suspects. Now, the Pentagon says she's not a suspect, but clearly that part of the government is compromised. But the whole thing is crazy. Despite all the incriminating evidence, she still has her job. She still has security clearance. And in her position, she could do a lot of things to jeopardize U.S. forces or give the Iranians an advantage. Last year, a number of members of Congress wrote to the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Lloyd Austin, asking for Tabatabai to be removed from her position due to security concerns about her alleged communication with Iran. Austin obviously didn't agree. She's still there and she's been promoted. Now, Robert Malley, he was the most influential person in shaping the Democrats' diplomatic strategy with Iran and their foreign policy in the Middle East overall. He's actually Jewish, or at least by birth. His mother worked for the UN delegation of the Algerian National Liberation Front. That's the socialist organization that led Algeria's struggle for independence against the French. They were extremely brutal. They used torture and executions and massacred civilians. To be fair, the French were brutal as well. Now, Mali's father was a journalist who focused on anti-imperial movements in Africa. He was very much a leftist, and he had strong anti-French views about their policies in Africa mostly. In 1980, the French president actually expelled them because of his attitudes. He was a real radical. So the young Robert Mali was clearly influenced by his parents. He would later write a book called The Call from Algeria, Third Worldism, Revolution, and the Turn to Islam. In Paris, he was in the same class as, get this, Anthony Blinken, at a prestigious school, quite privileged. And later at Harvard Law School, he was in the same class as Barack Obama. So he was making his contacts even then. He started his political career in the Clinton administration, and later he was called Obama's point man on the Middle East. But in 2008, Obama had to drop him because he was so entangled with Hamas. He would often meet with them, and people were concerned that he was just a little too close. But Obama later brought him back to do Middle East policy, so go figure. He's often said things that make him sound sympathetic with the likes of Hamas and Hezbollah. He said there's so much misinformation about them. None of them are crazies. They may do things we consider to belong to a different realm of rationality, but within their own system, it's often very logical. In Israel, we've known for years what Hamas does to their own people. If anyone is even suspected of so-called conspiring with Israel, which could just mean trying to have conversations with people, just trying to set up peace, communication, etc., those people are tied behind a motorbike by chains and dragged through the streets of Gaza. It's incredibly brutal. Just recently, 2 men were suspected, not proven, but suspected of so-called conspiring with Israel. They were hanged from lampposts and their legs were cut off in front of a public crowd. So that's Hamas, but according to Robert Mali, they're not crazies. And late last year, it turned out that his loyalties were actually with Tehran, not Washington, and certainly not with Israel. So let's reflect on what motivates Robert Mali, because we can learn a lot from him. He appears to have developed a kind of romanticized empathy with people in the third world. It's a perspective we see a lot among socialists and Marxist communists. It views marginalized people as victims of Western power, and it overlooks their human rights abuses, their corruption, their lack of effective systems. It sees them as having no agency. Like if they're poor, it's not due to mismanagement or corruption or cronyism, it's the fault of the West. Or if they're savage and brutal, well, they're just frustrated and they can't control themselves, something like that. Or it's just a different culture and they're not actually evil. It's the racism of low expectations, and it's appalling. And the flip side is a view of the West as a big bully. It views first world prosperity as the result of deception and plunder, rather than efficient systems and the production of value for the marketplace. It's the victim oppressor narrative. It's been on full display on college campuses throughout the last 12 months, and is very seductive. It blinds people to the reality of life. And it appears to have led Robert Mali to betray both the United States and Israel. And it very well could have led to a nuclear-armed Iran, and it still could. And that could very possibly cause another Holocaust. So maybe that's why the Iran nuclear deal made no sense whatsoever, except for Iran. And it seems that this worldview is shared to at least some extent by Barack Obama, Anthony Blinken, and likely a lot more in the Democratic Party. Remember, they knew him for many years, and they still hired him and still worked with him. And it's a real worry that proper security protocols are not being enforced at all. And agents who are serving the enemies of the West, even suspected of it, are given access to the reins of power in the White House, the State Department, and the Pentagon. So where's Robert Mali now? Well, he's teaching a course on Middle Eastern diplomacy at Yale. That's where your hard-earned dollars go when you send your kid to university in the United States. Someone under FBI investigation for having betrayed the West is teaching a course on Middle East negotiation. Make your vote count.